That's right, we're starting our HL biology course right here in the dirt. To be more precise, this is a pile of compost. Notice the eggshells, notice the corn cobs. All this is rotten material, and it's actually teeming with life, and that's our main focus today, defining life. So welcome to section 1.1. This is your very first video lecture. So I'm going to break down section 1.1 into two different lectures. If we look at the syllabus, this is posted in Canvas under your modules. The syllabus right here contains all the information you're going to need to know for this particular section. Now 1.1 is broken down to these things that we call understandings. This is like the basic content that you'll need to know. Today, this video is going to cover just the first four understandings, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's going to also cover a few of the applications. Now, the applications are basically how we take those understandings and then apply them to something a bit more interesting. So we'll also take care of the first couple applications, and this skill we'll deal with, which has to do with using microscopes. And so to get started today, I'm going to jump in and we're going to talk about how we can define life. And here's the deal. If you were to ask 7 different biologists to define life, chances are you would get 7 different answers. And that's because it's hard to define what life is without using the word life. So instead, what we do is we describe the characteristics or the behaviors that all living things exhibit. IB defines 7 different functions of life. And the first part of this video, where you should probably start taking notes, is identifying the 7 functions of life. And to do that, I'm going to take you outside, back into my garden. We're going to talk about a few different plants and how they are exhibiting the 7 functions of life. And we'll end up back at that big pile of decomposing garbage known as my compost bin. Here we go. All right, I'd like to talk about 2 functions of life with this bean plant here. So this bean plant has found a way to wrap around this pole that's sticking into my garden. So what it's doing right now is it's responding to its environment. All living things will respond to their environment. So the first function of life is response. So that bean plant was growing, and it found that pole, and it wrapped around that pole. If we look farther back, we have some smaller plants in here, and they are doing the second function of life, which is growth. That's rather obvious. They get larger by growing out of the soil. And if you look here still at these cucumber plants, there's some basil. Looking back to the right, these cucumber plants have these tendrils. There's a tendril sticking up right there. And those tendrils, just like the bean plant, they're going to reach out in their environment until they find something to climb, and then they will respond to their environment. In addition to that kind of response, notice that the leaves are growing up toward the sun. That is a type of response. They grow up toward the sun. Their roots follow the force of gravity down into the earth. So plants are constantly responding to their environment. So we have the first 2 functions of life, growth and response. All right, so not in my garden anymore. Here's a giant leaf from one of my house plants. And we're going to focus on, well, 3 functions of life here. First one is what we call homeostasis. It might be familiar to you. Homeostasis is when living things maintain their internal conditions. Now this leaf is going to be releasing vapor, water vapor, through tiny little holes on the underside of the leaf through a process called transpiration. Now, water is taken up from the roots, fed to the plant for important life functions, and then extra water is going to exit the plant through little holes in the bottom of that leaf. Now, releasing that extra water helps to maintain the internal conditions for this plant, so it can carry out homeostasis. Those same tiny holes, they're called stomata, will bring in the gases that this plant needs, CO2 most importantly. Now, that CO2 is part of this plant's nutrition. It's bringing things in for chemical reactions. And then the plant will release waste. In this case, the waste is oxygen gas released through those same holes, those stomata. That gas is released as a waste, and that is the process of excretion. So let's do that again. We've got homeostasis, where water vapor is regulated by leaving excess water leaving through these leaves. nutrition. We have CO2, carbon dioxide, entering these same holes through the leaf. And then we've got oxygen or waste of excretion, the function excretion, leaving through that leaf, all happening right here in this one part of the plant. This next one is obvious. All living things must reproduce. Now, there's many methods for reproduction, asexual or sexual reproduction. We'll talk about a lot of this later on throughout the course. But for now, plants will reproduce by making flowers, which then eventually develop into fruit with fertilized seeds inside. And we're back to the compost for our last function of life. This last function is called metabolism. And perhaps in my garden, it's the most important one, because metabolism refers to all of the chemical reactions that take place in a living thing or in a living cell. Now, right here in the compost, what we've got is all of those dead materials. They become the nutrition for tiny, microscopic fungi and bacteria, which are working to break down all that nutrition, break down all that dead stuff, eat it up. Their metabolism is going to convert all that nutrition into waste, but that waste is going to be rich in nutrients that my plants can access, and that helps them grow. Then the plants can become nutrition for me, and the cycle goes on. So those are your 7 functions of life. Feel free to review and make sure you have notes on all 7 functions. All right, now understanding those 7 functions would be considered an understanding in the IB syllabus. It's basically just, can you understand this concept? Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that understanding about the 7 functions of life and apply it, and this is moving on to an application from the syllabus, to understand how those 7 functions are carried out in a single-celled organism, which is this guy right here. This is a paramecium. The full name is Paramecium caudatum. That's the genus and the species. Usually they're just referred to as paramecium. So when you look at this, a single-celled organism, we have to prove that it's a living thing. In other words, we have to prove that it carries out all 7 functions of life. So first of all, it lives in an aquatic environment, and it swims around in the water. And so that movement of swimming around in the water is usually a response to some stimulus in the environment. Maybe it swims away from something it doesn't like or towards something that it does like, and that movement and response is carried out by little structures that are called cilia. They look like hairs on the outside of the cell. And so response in this living thing is carried out by the cilia. Next, homeostasis. Homeostasis is carried out by this star-like structure. This is called a contractile vacuole. And it's basically just squishing, sorry about the sound effects, it's just squishing water out of the cell because it needs to maintain the amount of water inside the cell so it doesn't get too inflated or too shriveled. So it's maintaining its internal conditions. Homeostasis, that contractile vacuole is taking care of that. We also have some food vacuoles in here, and those food vacuoles are going to be taking care of the nutrition. So nutrition, food is going to be entering into that paramecium through a food vacuole. Now, once that food is inside, that paramecium needs to conduct all the chemical reactions to keep it alive. That is its what? Its metabolism. And any leftover waste must be released through the plasma membrane by excretion. So now we've got all these functions going on. I skipped growth. Now, growth in a single-celled organism doesn't involve cell division. It just involves this single cell growing to a certain extent, and then that's it. So it grows for a little while, and then it's kind of done. So there is some growth early on in the life of this paramecium. And this paramecium will reproduce by fission. Asexually, just divides and forms new paramecia. And it does that with instructions in the DNA, which are housed in its nucleus right here. And so I'm going to switch to another slide that has all of those functions laid out, which are labeled by the structure that take care of them. And this is your homework assignment. You're going to draw out a paramecium, label all the structures just like you see here, and you're going to annotate, meaning describe how those structures can complete each of the 7 functions of life. And so you're going to do that with the paramecium, and then you will choose a photosynthetic organism which is also single-celled and can carry out all 7 functions of life. So that's it for part 1. The rest of the lecture gets a bit more interesting. We're talking about stem cells, talking about stem cell therapies. It's going to get a little bit more higher level, if you will. So don't forget to complete your homework. It's posted on Canvas, and we'll wrap up the rest of this in class and with your next lecture series. All right, that's it for tonight. Take care.